5% to 8, 18 years, it almost doubles. People click in this box, no religious affiliation. What's up with that? And you think about how churches are so organized, and we got everything going for us. Why is this? But here, 4 years later, 2012. Why our country? Why on our watch? What's up with this? Now, I don't want to keep boring you. I want to go back to 1940 for a second. 5%, the majority of the 5% checked that box because they were atheists. They were atheists. This is where it gets really interesting. The majority of the people that checked that box of 19%, they're not atheists. Here's the kicker. They used to be Christian. They had Christian background. They grew up in Christianity. They were a part of a Christian church. Now they check the box, that's not a part of my life anymore. So more research is done in this book, and they said the stereotypical modern American family goes through this cycle. Christian family wants to raise their kids in church, puts them through Sunday school, junior high ministries, high school ministries. Kids grow up in church. Then they go off to college. When they go off to college, they fall off the radar. Okay? And they're, getting their college degree, or they're going to technical school, and they're getting their training. They're starting their career. And life is just busy. They're not in church, but then they have kids. Then these kids are swinging off the chandeliers, and they're lighting fires in their bedrooms, and they're thinking, we got to do something. And they remember what their parents did, and they get them back into church, and there's the cycle. The millennials are not proving the same pattern. The millennials grew up in church, and they're not going back. What did they not see? What did they not hear? If this survey was spread evenly throughout the United States, that's like 1 in 5, 20% of our country. That means if you have 10 houses on your block, 2 of these families have checked this box, and and here's the crazy thing again, is they're not opposed to you. They're not atheists. They're not opposed to what you're doing. Hey, if it works for you, more power to you. Hey, good on you. Didn't work for us, we're not going. So, Pastor, theoretically, 20% of your town is in this margin. What do we do about that? What can we do about that? I get back to this. Have these people really been in church? Have these people really heard the gospel? Did they really hear about Jesus? Now I know how we've eaten a lot of donuts. I'm talking a lot of the metrics here. So I just want to take just a quick time out and throw up this next image. I just want you to see this. That's my dog. Best dog I ever had. That's not photoshopped either. She is that ugly. Okay. So I know how numbers and donuts really don't work well in the morning. So now let's kick back into the message here. So permit me to preach to the choir here. I think that a big percentage of that 20% have never really fully heard the gospel and have been discipled and mentored. They've walked into churches that didn't have what you guys have. And they haven't heard how Jesus healed people and turned water into wine and calmed the storms and walked on water and fed the multitudes with just a small amount of food. And really even his humanity, how he hungered and he was weary and how he was sad, how he cried, how he loved, how he bled, how he died, how he rose. They haven't heard that message. And then not only haven't heard this message, they really didn't get to dig into his teachings. I think it's one of the reasons why people keep checking this box at a rapid rate. I want to give you 4 scriptures. Like I said, I'm preaching to the choir, but I want to lay this groundwork. 4 scriptures that paints this clause of his teaching. It's been said that a mediocre teacher tells. A good teacher explains. A great teacher demonstrates. And an awesome teacher inspires. Jesus did all of this. His teachings were amazing. In fact, the word amazing is used over and over and over in the Bible describing his teaching. Matthew chapter 7, verses 28 through 29, it says, when Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, for he taught with real authority, quite unlike the teachers of the religious law. Matthew 13, 54 through 56 says, when he taught in the synagogue, which happened to be in Nazareth in this story, everyone was amazed and said, where does he get this wisdom? John 7, 46 says, we have never heard anyone speak like this. They're saying, how does he know this stuff? He's not a product of our system. Who was his rabbi? How has he figured all of this out? You know, you and I, we teach or we preach from our own cultural bias, yet he didn't, because he wasn't a product of their culture. John 7, verse 15 says, the Jews were amazed and asked, how did this man get so much learning without having been taught? Jesus answered, the teachings is not my own. It comes from the one who sent me. Rick Warren said, Tommy Alvarez says, see, Tommy, grouping, put you in the right group, right? You know, we'll quote people for credibility. Jesus never quoted anybody. 75 times he said, I say unto you. He was the ultimate quote. His teachings were radical back then. And here's where we lose something. I think sometimes we forget they're radical today. I've been to Israel a few times, and one of my most favorite places to be is right in this area where you're looking off over here and you're seeing the Sea of Galilee, and then you're looking right over here, and here's where Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount. And if you think about the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, if you're mourning, blessed are you if you're hungry. And you know what? If another rabbi of the same era was giving that message, he wouldn't have been saying it like that. He said, oh, I'm sorry if you're poor. I'm sorry if you're hungry. I'm sorry if you mourn. But Jesus was preaching from a whole different kingdom. He came from a whole different place. And he was saying, good for you if you're hungry for righteousness. You know why? Because these people over here with all the white robes, if you're poor, good for you if you're hurt, good for you if you're hungry, blessed are you if you mourn, because you'll be comforted, because your heart is open and it's pliable. See, what was broken was the religious system. God had left him 10 commandments. He said, obey these 10 commandments. The religious people says, God, we need to help you out a little bit. You know, you're on the right track, God, but, you know, here's this new improved version that we have, and we're going to be more militant and more radical. And it's not just 10 commandments anymore. It is 613. They wrote this thing called the Talmud. 365 don'ts. Doesn't have anything to do with the days of the year. 248 do's. And you got to do all of them every day. This is what these people are living under. This is the oppression. And it's like they're walking around with their bedazzled robes, just clean, and they're walking around with their scorecard, and they're letting everybody know that they're obeying all 613 of these every day, every day. How about you? Well, these guys are doing it full time. And these people, can you imagine being a mom of 4 kids, and you've got to make your meals from scratch, and you got to feed your family and clean your house? You get home at night, and you're having dinner, and your husband looks at you and says, how many commandments did you obey today? You look at him, you say 3 and maybe 2 if you ask me one more time. These people couldn't do it. They couldn't do it. And they were so weary of religion. They were so weary of everything that was going on. And then all of a sudden, here comes this man with these teachings that were giving them a little bit of hope. They'd go to the temple, and people in the temple, the teachers in the temple are yelling, 613, 613, that's what you got to do. We know a few generations, Jesus is known for 3:16. But Jesus came, and he doubles down. He says, I'm not talking about 613 laws. In fact, I'm doubling down and just say, you don't need to be worried about 2. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And number 2, love your neighbor as yourself. Do this and live. Pharisees hated him. All that boils down to is just to love God and love others. This is a great 2 rules of life to live. Paul said it best when he says, without love, without compassion, we're nothing but crashing cymbals. What the church doesn't need is more cowbell. Sorry, there's only a certain niche that would understand that humor there. Thank you. I think churches are missing it. Somehow the message is not sinking in. I heard Pastor Tommy, if you don't mind me sharing, I was a bug on the wall in a conversation he had just the other day. He says, how is it when people can go to church one time a week and they get stirred and challenged and they want to do something and then they have no more opportunity until a week later? How can our churches disciple once a week? How can you grow in the Lord if you only see another Christian brother on a Sunday morning? Why are so many people checking this box? Wasn't working for me. Maybe they didn't have the chance to really try it out. How can we effectively demonstrate the heart of God to a broken world? Several years ago, I felt so unhealthy. I wasn't unhealthy, and I started examining my life, and I would get up in the morning, and I would go sit on the couch and drink my coffee and have my devotionals. Then I would sit at the breakfast table, eat my breakfast. Then I would sit in my pickup and go to the office. Then I would sit at my office and work on my computer. Then I would sit at a restaurant and have lunch with somebody. Then I would sit at my office the rest of the day. Then I would sit in my truck and drive home, and then I would sit at the dinner table and have dinner. Then I would sit on the couch and watch a movie. And then the worst thing happened is then I would lay in bed for 8 hours. I thought, there is no exercise in my life. And so I started exercising. I've gotten this real thrill of getting out early in the morning and running. And there's this little park in Mesa that I love to run at. And it's right next to where the Cubs built their new training facility. It's just a beautiful little park. And I like to go out right before sunrise because we just got killer sunrises. It was like a dog being strangled. I mean, it was so bad. Like these wine goblets that would resonate to the key of C. He would take a tuning fork in and he would strike it, and it would begin to give off the key of C. And then he would run it across the glasses, and unbelievable. You know what I think also in church today that we have to be careful for is apathy. Rollo May said, hate is not the opposite of love. Apathy is. And that apathy scares me because it's like burnout, Pastor. You don't know that you have it until it is way inside of you. And apathy is when you're doing something over and over and over again like you've done for 20 years, but the passion is gone. Apathy's scary. There's some graffiti that I think is the best way to describe apathy, if we can throw that on the screen. Fight apathy or don't. You know, getting to that in pastoring is a scary, scary place. Let me show you, I think, a humorous illustration of apathy. The city of Montreal Animal Services touts all over the city, tweet us if there's an animal control problem and we'll take care of it. So this guy is getting on a bus and he sees a dead raccoon right at the front of the bus. And so he tweets, Animal Services, dead raccoon, right at the corner of such and such, and he tweets him at 9 a.m. in the morning. Let's go to the next slide. 6 hours later, the raccoon is still there. Somebody's put some flowers on the raccoon. There's a condolences card, and then a framed picture of Mrs. Raccoon. All right, keep going. Dead raccoon gets his own hashtag dead raccoon TO. More people are signing his card. Let's keep going. 8 p.m. flowers are piling up. Keep going. Oh yeah, the whole city gets involved and tells everybody to open their trash bins all night tonight in memory of Mr. Raccoon. 8:20, 12 hours later, the raccoon is still there. Go to the next one. There's now a candle village for the raccoon. Keep going. People are still coming. They're leaving messages, lighting candles. Keep going. 11 p.m., 14 hours later, Animal Services pulls up, takes care of it. Apathy. Burnout as a pastor, and I'm tying this all in with don't grow weary. Burnout as a pastor, and you'll know that you'll have burnout when you see problems in your church and you decide just to walk on by because it takes too much effort to deal with it. That's when you know you're burned out. Got to be careful. Apathy. And here's one other thing. I want to read you a story that has another perspective of apathy that is actually a haunting story. And I want to read it to you because I think it'll have more impact if I read it versus share it. And it's the story of an old man that went to church when he was a kid in World War II in Germany. He said, I lived in Germany during the Nazi Holocaust. I considered myself a Christian. I attended church since I was a small boy. We had heard the stories of what was happening to the Jews, but like most people today in Germany, we tried to distance ourselves from the reality of what was really taking place. What could anyone do to stop it? A railroad track ran behind our small church, and each Sunday morning we would hear the whistle in a distance and then the clacking of the wheels moving over the track. We became disturbed when one Sunday we noticed the cries coming from the train as it passed by. We grimly realized that the train was carrying Jews. They were like cattle in those cars. Week after week, that train whistle would blow. We would dread to hear the sound of those old wheels because we knew that the Jews would begin to cry out as they passed by our church. It was so terribly disturbing. We could do nothing to help these poor, miserable people, yet their screams tormented us. We knew exactly at what time the whistle would blow, and we decided the only way to keep from being so disturbed by the cries was to start singing our hymns. By the time that train came rumbling past the churchyard, we were singing at the tops of our voices. If some of the screams reached our ears, we just sing a little louder until we could hear them no more. Years have passed, and no one talks about it much anymore, but I still hear that train whistle in my sleep. I still hear them crying out for help. God forgive all of us who calls ourselves Christians, yet did nothing to intervene. Apathy is a scary place to be. Do you think this could be happening in your church today? That you see needs and you just sing a little louder? Do you think this could be happening in your heart today personally? We're going to have to make choices in life, and it's either sing a little louder or love a little deeper. What are we going to do? What are we doing? Why do we have this rising of the nuns? Maybe they've walked into churches that were filled with apathy, and they walked away saying there was nothing there. I want to close with one last thought. I grew up in West Texas, Lubbock, Texas, matter of fact, and my mom and dad had a little mom and pop shop, and Dad worked on electric motors for a living, and he'd work really hard. And there were often nights when he'd work way through the night, and there were times when my mom would make a midnight meal and a thermos of coffee and drive it down to him. And when she did that, she would put me in the back of her station wagon. We had a 59 Chevy Brookwood station wagon. And she'd put me in the back of that station wagon with a blanket and a pillow. And I was 4 or 5 years old at the time. And I would just lay there. And I wouldn't have to look up to see if we're close to Dad's shop. I could smell it. Because right next to Dad's shop was the Rainbow Bread Factory. And it was a big place. And every night they would fire up their ovens and start baking bread through the night. And that aroma of fresh baked bread would just fill that part of town. Isn't fresh baked bread one of the best aromas in the world? We need to make that as a cologne or something. And then gain 150 pounds because attracted to flour. And you would smell that. Now, I give you that image to go back, and I'm going to touch on Dean's message this morning. He talked about Ruth. Bethlehem, what the word Bethlehem means is house of bread. And so here's Naomi, and her family is in Bethlehem, and they run out of bread in the house of bread. There is a famine, and they have to leave, and they go to Moab, Utah. Joking. Moab's a cruel place. So Naomi loses her husband and 2 of her sons, but she had 2 daughter-in-laws. And then she hears rumor that there is bread now back in the house of bread. The famine is over, and she wants to go back to Bethlehem. And so she asked both daughter-in-laws to go with her, and one of them stayed, and the other one goes. We know that is Ruth.